to This Food in History. I'm Soph, I'm your host today, and we are going to be looking at a foundational item in one of my favorite types of things, pastry. So we'll be looking at the origins and variations of pastry dough in different dishes around the world that have been born from it. So let's just dive right on in. While researching the history, I found a few conflicting ideas about where pastry comes from. My final answer is Egypt. So they helped birth baking with a bread, an unleavened bread that they made from soaking grains in water and cooking it on hot rocks. We've actually talked about something like this before when we were doing our history in pizza, since that's also one of the original doughs and breads that branch out to different types of things. They're also the first recorded civilization to create their bread with yeast. So in gattocakes.com, they report that this came about from leaving the bread out in the elements and it became exposed to wild yeast that was kind of like in the air and it fermented. So this theory says that it gives them the dough to bake later, then they could have it like the next day or so by leaving it overnight. I also found some data that suggests that these early uses from Egyptian and later Greek and Romans was actually like a phyllo type pastry that was made up with just flour and oils. Baklava is an example of a modern day use of this with this thin sheet pastry. In the past, these were used with fruits or dates and nuts in a dumpling format, and writings on tombs show evidence of these types of treats. While in 2014, some of the oldest ovens ever discovered were found in Croatia, Greece is known to have invented the enclosed wood heated ovens around 5 or 600 BC. So in these times, these could be communal ones for like lower class, so everybody had to kind of use it together. But if you were part of the wealthier members of society, you would have had individual ones to use. And it was all at the time for baking breads. After this, Rome would start to take up the mantle by essentially establishing mass production baking, and they considered their bed breakers as actually as skilled artisans. And they had a Roman Empire's Bakers Guild by 168 BC. This was called the Pastorum, and they were the ones that were these artisans. So this gave a high regard to the area, which is echoed in an annual festival that they celebrates the oven goddess named as Fornax. The spread of the Roman Empire then spreads baking all across Europe as it grows and grows out. Pastry dough was also created with them as well. Because they used fats and honey to breads to bring us rich bread, and also some of our first pastries then. But what they used the dough for was actually just a wrapping. So they would take the dough and they would wrap it around meats and games to hold in all of the juices, and then you could bake it in that. It would also help keep it, aromatic as well. Aromatic as well. And that was actually what they used, but they didn't eat it. They made the dough, they wrapped the stuff in the dough, they cooked it that way, but then they threw it out. It was not something that was considered edible. All they did was use it for a purpose and tossed it aside then, before they would eat all the stuff that was inside of it. And these early pastries would evolve into short crusts. That's what I was worried of. As fats and milks were added into the dough. As we move into the Middle Ages, pastries are becoming more established, and a version known as coffers is used to make meat and fish pies, as well as tarts with fruit centers, such as the strawberry tart that I actually made on C'est La Cuisine, and honestly pretended to make once would be the best way to put that. The Fond of Curry came out as maybe the first English cookbook for pastry near the end of the 14th century. Let me just catch that. And gives us the creation of hot crust pastry and how it was used for these coffers and more for meat pies. Into the 15th century, we'd start seeing egg yolks and saffron being added to the crust, which starts giving us a little bit of color into them. And we start seeing baking being spread in places like France as an art form. And more guilds are starting to come out, and which we haven't really seen since the Holy Roman Empire. And these places are exclusive and super protective of their knowledge. So they start, in France then, they start to have apprenticeships and mass production of baking. Again, a Spanish expedition, which you might have heard of it, in the 1400s, found a new source of flavors in the new land, such as cocoa and sugars, that expanded the use and taste of these pastries. And let's take a period jump to the 1600s, 1645 to be exact. and introduce ourselves to Claudius Gale. Good man Claudius. His father was sick, super sick, and he wanted to help him out because his dad's on this restrictive diet and he can only have certain types of food, so he wants to make a lighter bread for him. So this lighter bread, that what he does is he adds a bunch of butter and kneads it into the batter, which is unheard of. And so his people are like, hey, when you go to bake that, the butter's just gonna melt and it's just gonna fall out and it's not gonna do anything later. This technique shouldn't have worked and it was believed to fail, but instead what he invented was the puff pastry. And then he jumped pastries to a whole new level. He then, after all of this, and comes up with a super soft version of dough and crust that he's made, moves to Paris and starts working for Le Sabot Patisserie and finds fame for this whole new method of pastry making. And later he works for the brothers Mosca and Florence, who many thought actually were the ones who invented it, but he didn't even share it with them. He would basically work in a locked room and create all of the doughs on his own to hide his recipe and hide his methods. Hannah Besaker also has a handwritten manuscript even in 1692 that records a similar recipe for puff pastries out of England, which let's stay in England a little bit and talk about some of the things they've been doing around this time. The Melton Mowbray pork pie makes a name for itself in the 1700s and is said to grow because of a growth in cheese making and fox hunting. The pork pie itself is a hot crust pie and it uses aspices and jellies in them. It also uses a symbiotic relationship as it has a runoff that can be used to feed pork, which grows the pork population and then allows more pies to be made, so it just keeps kind of cycling in on itself. These pies were kind of handmade ones and perfect for traveling, so when hunters visited for fox hunting, it helped spread these pies further around the country and a little bit around the world, because people could come in, get these pies, buy a few, take them with them as they traveled. Also in England here, we've got the Cornish pastry, which has been growing in popularity with coal miners since the 1300s as a handheld lunch. This was made with cheap ingredients, and so it spread amongst the working class and laborers. The Bedfordshire Clanger is a similar position, but it's actually contained both sweet and savory fillings separated at the different ends of a single pastry. So this end would be sweet, this end would be savory, they'd meet in the middle. And then we're gonna skip over the channel back into France, where we have our first celebrity chef in Marie-Antoine Carême, who kept with the master's idea of baking and pastries as a work of art. His pâtissier had elegant designs in the windows, and he served many royal and famous leaders, including George IV, and brought pastry making as a fine dining experience that was for the extremely wealthy. He also is credited with inventing a millefeuille, which is my father's Thomas' favorite form of pastry. He loves Napoleon's when created a specific way, not with whipped cream, to be completely honest. This is his main thing against it. And as an accident, he actually created the tarte tatin. He authored the book The Pâtissier Royal for his techniques and is one of the first to do so. Many modern day methods are from the results of his baking and expertise. However, we still need to bring pastries to the poor masses, and the French Revolution does that for us. When we pretty much have ended the royal line after the unplanned and surprise ending, the servants and artisans who worked for the royal palace became free, and they used this unexpected turn of events to open individual businesses that served a more common man. Many of these pâtissiers are actually still open in Paris to this day, and people can still visit them for the masses. Pastries have become history, as they say after this, and all forms of pastry can be found all over the world. Taste Atlas actually has a list of the 100 most popular pastries that you can find around the world, and so I grabbed a few of them for this video so that we can kind of take a look at how different pastries get used in different types of pastries. First, let's work on this. In case you're curious, what I'm working on is building a puff pastry. We're just making the dough here today because I wanted to learn how. I'm going to work on getting this kneaded together. And there we go. We have our dough. So, the quota is a deep fried pastry, and it's a traditional Iranian sweet consisting of a soft wheat dough wrapped around almond, or it's without filling. They're generously spiced with cinnamon, rose water, cardamom, and orange blossoms, and then shaped into round or crescent forms. They're kind of small in size and dusted with powdered sugar, and they're a staple dessert served at many Iranian festivals and celebrations. Zelejanica is a savory Bosnian pie, which is kind of a pita, which consists of thinly rolled phyllo dough. That's then filled with a combination of blanched spinach, fresh cow cheese, cream, and eggs. The dough is rolled into a thin sheet and then sprinkled with the filling and shaped into a coil. When baked, the pie is occasionally doused with warm milk or a combination of oil and water. It's best served freshly baked with sour cream and yogurt on the side. The Cruffin is a cross between a croissant and a muffin. It's a muffin that's made from laminated croissant dough and filled with different flavors and ingredients such as pastry cream, peanut butter, cream and strawberries, chocolate, salted caramel, and many others. This treat was a recent invention. It's believed that the first one was created in 2013 by Kate Reed of Lune Croissantiere in Melbourne, Australia. It's subsequently popularized and trademarked by Mr. Holmes Bakehouse of San Francisco. The zelnik is a traditional North Macedonia pie that can be filled with a variety of different ingredients, such as cheese, spinach, meat, leeks, or cabbage. For the best result, it should be brushed with butter and oil before baking, so the pie recommended to pair it with a glass of yogurt. Oh, it gives a golden brown color. All right. Pineapple buns are golden, crispy crusted sweet pastries originating in Hong Kong. Despite their name, they don't contain pineapple, but are named after a checkerboard pattern of the crust that resembles the skin of a pineapple. As an important part of Hong Kong's cultural heritage, they're made with only 4 ingredients: flour, oil, sugar, and eggs. Crispy and sugary in the exterior and soft on the inside. It's a favorite food of many locals due to its inexpensive price. The buns are usually eaten for breakfast or in the afternoon with tea. So pastry is a great wrapping for many foods, and I enjoy so many forms of it. I admit that puff pastry itself, which is, you know, those types of desserts are literally usually a bit much for me, a little too doughy, but you know, savory things such as meat pies, empanadas, and more are phenomenal to me, and I could smash a Danish or turnover pretty much any day. Thank you so much for watching, and this has been This Food in History. I'm Soph, and I will see you next time. Thank you.